Hello, I'm Jeff Bruette, and welcome to Professional Techniques for Deluxe Paint 3. In the next 60 minutes, we will be demonstrating a variety of tips and techniques to help you achieve truly professional results. While this video will be informative, it is not intended to be a replacement for your Deluxe Paint 3 manual. In addition, there are files included with Deluxe Paint 3 that we will be using in our demonstrations, so you may want to have them if you wish to follow along.
Dan Silva of Electronic Arts created Deluxe Paint, a program that was easy to use with flexible tools that allowed you to paint freely and creatively. He improved many of its features with Deluxe Paint 2, and now with the release of Deluxe Paint 3, the age of professional PC animation has arrived. DPaint 3 combines the most powerful Amiga painting program with cell animation, more advanced tools, improved fonts, and new graphic modes. We are especially pleased to have Dan Silva joining us to contribute his unique insight. After you spend a little time with this video, try out the examples. You'll find that you can use DPaint 3 to create colorful graphics and animation in a fraction of the time it would take with any other program. Please make sure that you have some working familiarity with DPaint's basic menus and tools, because we plan to cover new techniques and updated tools in the coming hour. If you're familiar with Deluxe Paint, you should be able to follow along quite easily. If not, you may want to read a guided tour in your manual.
Feel free to pause the tape at any point. Remember, the more you watch, read, and experiment, the more you will get out of Deluxe Paint 3. Whatever approach you take, welcome to the world of computer-generated art.
I got into computer graphics in not the most direct way. I actually started out in mechanical engineering. But when I was going to school, which was originally at Stanford, there wasn't any computer graphics department. Matter of fact, there wasn't anything called computer graphics that I had ever heard about. And I got into using computers in mechanical engineering to synthesize three-dimensional kinematic linkages, which sounds pretty complicated, but actually it involved many of the same concepts that you use in computer graphics. And when I started working at other jobs, I worked out at NASA Ames doing scientific programming, I did everything I could to get my hands on equipment that I could create computer graphics with, because I just felt a real need to create some sort of tangible output. I wasn't into programming in the abstract.
While the Amiga has not changed in basic graphic capability since its release several years ago, many software products have. This is also the case with Deluxe Paint 3, with its support of overscan and half-bright modes.
The extra half-bright mode is a new feature in Deluxe Paint. This painting mode is only available if you are using 64 colors. Let's change our screen format now. Choose Screen Format from the Picture menu. Choose 64 colors and click OK. Now the palette contains 64 colors. The first 32 colors are the same colors we had in low-res format. The second 32 colors are half the brightness of the first 32. The 64 color extra half-bright is special in that the first 32 colors in the palette can be changed to any of the Amiga's 4096 colors, whereas the second set of 32 colors in the palette will always be half the intensity of the first 32. They are not directly changeable. Note, not all Amiga 1000 computers support this mode. Let's look at how half-bright mode paints. Choose Load from the Picture menu and load the picture named Hall of Stars from the tutorial drawer in the low-res drawer of your art disk. When the requester asks if you want to change the screen format, click No. Now select the largest built-in brush and the dotted freehand tool. Choose H-Bright from the Mode menu. Scroll anywhere on the picture using the left mouse button. Notice when you paint with the left button in H-Bright mode, any colors in the first 32 of your palette are changed to their half-bright. Now scroll over your picture again, but use the right mouse button. Any areas of your picture using one of the first 32 colors of your palette are unaffected by your scrolling, but the areas using half-bright colors become lighter. Let's take a look at how we use half-bright in the Fill Type requester. First, we'll range the entire palette and click OK. Next, bring up the Fill Type requester by clicking on the right mouse button on any fillable tool, or use the keyboard equivalent of Shift F. Now, to see the ranged colors, select one of the gradient types. Notice how the entire 64 color palette is displayed? This is because the half-bright gadget is turned on. Turn it off to use just 32 of the 64 colors. Click OK to see the effect that this gives. Notice how the range is based on the first 32 colors? To use the half-bright colors, select one of the half-bright colors that is within the range. By having the half-bright turned off, we can access the standard 32 colors or the half-bright 32 colors, but not both simultaneously. Now let's go back to the Fill Type Requester and turn half-bright on. Now both standard and half-bright colors appear in the range. There is another half-bright gadget in the Fill Type Requester. It is called H-Bright, and when selected, any fills that are done appear to be shaded or highlighted areas. Half-Bright allows you to paint with 64 colors and is a great way to add shadows to your works. Overscan mode extends the drawing area to the edge of the screen. DPaint 3 now allows you to paint and animate in Overscan. If you select Overscan from the Screen Format Requester, you will be provided a larger canvas to paint on. If the toolbox or menu bar is displayed when in Overscan mode, the screen is shifted down and to the left to make sure that you can see the controls. To adjust the position of the screen, hold down the Control key and use the cursor keys. This saves the trouble of exiting the program to adjust the positioning with preferences. Overscan mode is most useful for creating professional videos or presentation slides. If used correctly, Half-Bright will be an invaluable element of your creative works.
One of the aspects of Deluxe Paint, which I sometimes feel that gets lost in the comparative feature list that you see and the flashy features aspects of program, to me is the way the user interface is designed. First of all, I went to great pains to come up with a control structure so that when you're drawing a curve or drawing a circle, you can still use the key commands to change the size or the color of the brush. As a matter of fact, the first version of Deluxe Paint that I got up going on the Amiga had no menus. I basically got the skeleton of the program going, and it was all keystrokes, and you could do anything. And the first paintings on that program were done by Avril Harrison, and as I recall, she did them without any menus, using the pick command to pick colors out of the screen, and it worked fine.
Text is frequently an important element in the creation of professional computer graphics. This function has been redesigned in DPaint 3. One of the new features is the support of multicolored fonts.
To use multicolored fonts, we will need to run the Color Text program before we run DPaint 3. To do this, we simply double-click the Color Text icon that is on the DPaint 3 program disk. We see a message telling us the color text is active. Now that color text is running in the background, we can run DPaint 3 and have the necessary support for multicolored fonts. To enter the text mode, click the text icon with the left mouse button, or simply type T, the keyboard equivalent. This lets us type text using the current font. To select a different font, click on the text tool with the right mouse button to display the Choose Font Requester. To load a font from another drawer or disk, click in the Drawer Edit field and type the appropriate path name. In this case, we will type Art:"Fonts. In a moment, the fonts list from the Art disk appears in the Choose Font Requester. Your Art disk contains 2 colored fonts. Colored fonts require the Color Text program. Click the font named Cara Granite and click Show. This lets us preview a font before actually using it. To change point sizes, click on the arrows in the upper right corner. The bold, italic, and underline options don't usually look good on color fonts. Since this is a color font, we are asked if we want to use this font's palette. Choose Yes. Incidentally, you may not always want to choose Yes, because this could change the colors of your picture. Now let's try the Cara Granite font that we loaded. If you want to move text once it's on the screen, use the brush selector to pick it up and move it around. If you're adding text to a picture, there are 2 good tips that you should know. Fix the background before you type the text. This will let you pick up and move the text without messing up the picture. Another way to do this is to jump to the spare screen, type your text, Then pick it up as a brush to be placed on your picture. Here's another trick you may want to try. Pick up the text as a brush, select line mode, make a short line using the brush. This gives a three-dimensional effect. The two multicolored fonts included with DPaint 3 are part of a collection of professional fonts called Cara fonts. This collection is available in 3 packages: Headlines, Subheads, and Headlines 2. Other font sets are available from your Amiga dealer.
Even though Deluxe Paint can be used with just menus and without the keyboard commands, basically the design is set up so that it's better if you know how to use the keyboard commands. As a matter of fact, there are certain of the keyboard commands that I think people overlook that are essential to really understanding how the program is meant to work. For instance, the G key to turn on and off the grid, you can go over to the menu and do that, but if you use the key, you can do it while you're in the midst of an operation, such as while you're in the midst of drawing a circle. For instance, if you want to draw a circle with its center at the same point as another circle, you can use the grid to center it. And then while you're stretching the circle out, you can use G to turn this grid off, and so you're not constrained by the grid anymore. And another important command is the Shift-G command, which locks the grid to the particular point you're at. And that's a command that you can only do with a keyboard command because it only makes sense as a keyboard command. Another key for which the only way you can do the function is through the key, and which is a very important function, is the N key. A lot of people don't know about this. It's really the way you scroll the picture in DPaint. Though you can use the scroll arrows, that's awkward. But if you use the N key, what it does is it centers the pixel you're pointing at in both the magnify and the regular window. So by just pointing the N key at a pixel and hitting the N key, you immediately position the picture. You can use this for moving the magnify window around on the picture, say around a border of an object you're editing, and you don't really even have to think about scrolling. You just hit the N key once in a while and you're always centered.
There are several new fill types and paint modes in DPaint 3. In addition to half bright, which we discussed earlier, there is the tint, brush, and wrap fill types.
Along with the standard flood fill, there is the addition of boundary fill and a special mode which traces the filled shape with a brush. Let's begin with the new boundary fill. To demonstrate this, we'll draw a couple of shapes using various colors. There, that should be okay. Now a normal flood fill will affect all of the area of the same color on which we clicked. Notice how it stops when it reaches any other color? Now let's try the new boundary fill. First, tell DPaint what the boundary color should be. Do that by setting the background color to the desired boundary color. This can be done in several ways, but we'll use the comma key to get into the Pick Color mode. Using the right mouse button, click on the desired boundary color. Then choose the color to fill with. A normal fill, like this, does not fill the entire area. But since we have set the boundary and paint colors, we can use the boundary fill capabilities. Simply hold down the Alt key when clicking the mouse button. This will fill the entire area within the boundary color with the current paint color. This brings us to the various fill types. In addition to the solid, perspective, pattern, H-bright, and gradient fills, there are 3 new fill types. They are tint, brush, and wrap. Tint gives the effect of a tinted filter. You may want to review Tutorial 1 in Chapter 6 of your DPaint manual for information on hue, saturation, and value. First, we need to load a picture to apply the tint effect to. From the art disk, we'll choose the picture called Gorilla. Next, we'll access the fill type requester. This can be done by clicking with the right mouse button on any of the tools which have a fill mode, or we could use the key equivalent Shift F. We see various fill options from which we choose tint. Next, choose the color with which to tint, in this case blue. Then, when we create a filled shape, the area is tinted blue. When DPaint performs a tint operation, it calculates the RGB values for the new color and then looks in your palette for the closest matching color. As a result, the effect created is dependent on the colors available in the palette. This tint effect is the same as when you draw with a built-in brush and are in the tint paint mode. The tint mode can be used to produce a stained glass or colored filter effect, but you may need to plan an appropriate palette ahead of time to assure that there will be suitable colors available. The other two fill types are brush and wrap. The brush type stretches and distorts a custom brush to fit a filled area. First, create a simple pattern which can be used as a custom brush. Next, bring up the fill requester and choose brush type and click OK. Now make a filled circle. Notice all of our custom brushes here, but it has been stretched and squeezed to fill the circle. Let's compare this with the wrap type of fill. The wrap fill gives a perspective effect while adjusting a custom brush to fill a shape or area. We'll make a circle the same size as before. Now the custom brush looks as though it's being wrapped around a ball. Here are some examples of other shapes and brushes. Now that we've explained fill types, let's look at the new trace function, which works in conjunction with filled shapes. Although this function works with built-in brushes, we can demonstrate the function more graphically using a custom brush. To activate the trace option, hold down the Alt key while selecting any of the filled shape tools. This also works with the key equivalents. For example, if we want the trace option active while doing a filled freehand shape, we hold down the Alt and press the D key. Now when we create a filled shape, our area is first filled, and then DPaint goes back and traces the entire filled shape with the current brush. Incidentally, the way the area fills is based on the fill type settings, and the way it is traced is based on the line spacing settings. With the addition of these new fill types and brush modes, almost any fill effect you might need can be accomplished.
What got me back into being interested in working on Deluxe Paint was just the idea of what would it be like to have a paint program where you could paint on separate frames of an animation. And so one weekend I sat up late at night and did a very simple hack where I could page flip between full pages of bitmap and paint on it, and it was fascinating what you could do with that. But it was also frustrating because I could see that for a person that wasn't an animator, it would take you forever to create an animation. It really required a person with experience in animation, and I realized that animation is an order of magnitude harder than just painting a picture. So then I was hooked. I had to figure out for myself a way to make it easier to create some sort of animations with this thing. Well, the result of this was, I'd say, another year and a half of work programming up basically the animation capabilities into Deluxe Paint. So along the way I was able to put in a lot of things that I've been wanting to have into the program, such as overscan editing and half bright, all these things. But the main thing was animation.
This segment will introduce you to Deluxe Paint's animation features. We will begin by explaining the basic concept of animation, and then cover each of the ways to create animation with Deluxe Paint 3.
The basic idea of animation is that you have multiple pages that you can paint on and flip through. By creating images that differ slightly from page to page, and then playing them back in rapid succession, the illusion of motion is created. First, we'll create an object to move. Let's draw a small airplane. We'll pick up our airplane as a brush, and then clear the screen. Now that we have our object, the first step in building an animation is to create some frames to paint on. Choose Frames, Set Number from the Anim menu. Click in the Count Edit field, change the frame count to 10, and click OK. We now have 10 frames to paint on. Notice the numbers 1/10 at the left side of the menu bar? This means you are positioned on the first frame of a 10-frame animation. Now, let's stamp an airplane in the upper left area of the screen. The airplane we just placed is on frame 1. The trick of animation is to paint slightly different pictures on successive frames. We need to move to the next frame. Choose Control, Next from the Anim menu to move to frame 2. Notice that the menu bar now displays 2/10. We'll stamp another airplane to the right of where the first one was. Now we have an airplane on frame 1 and frame 2. To create a series of airplanes that move across the screen, we'll just continue with this procedure. Choosing from the menu to change the frame number forces you to move the mouse when you want to change frames. It is much easier to move through the animation frames using keyboard equivalents. You can see them listed in the menu beside the various options. We'll use these to complete our little animation. Next, we position our brush just to the right of the last airplane we stamped down. Press the 2 key at the top of the keyboard once, then click the mouse button to stamp the new airplane. We can repeat this step until we have completed all 10 frames. The menu bar will show 1/10 as our frame position, meaning we have painted on each of the frames and now return to frame 1. We've just created a brief animation. Now let's play it. Choose Control Play from the Anim menu, or just press 4 at the top of the keyboard. To stop the animation, press the space bar. We have just created an animation by painting on a series of frames individually. For animations that involve simple movement of an object, DPaint 3 provides a much easier method called anim painting. Essentially, the frames flip automatically while you paint. Click on Clear. With multiple frames established, DPaint gives you the option of clearing the current frame, a range of frames, or all of the frames. This simply removes images but does not affect the frame count. In this case, we'll choose all frames. All of our frames are cleared and we are set back to frame 1. Now let's do some anim painting. We will continue to use our airplane brush, so click the dotted freehand tool. Hold down the left Amiga key or the Commodore key if you have an Amiga 500. Paint by holding down the left mouse button and scroll from left to right. As we paint, the frames flip, so only one airplane is stamped on each frame of the animation. The frame counter in the menu bar shows us the frame we are on. When we reach the last frame, we loop back to frame 1, where we see our first airplane again. Now that we have painted for a few seconds, let's stop and play back the animation. We can stop the animation by clicking the mouse button or by pressing the space bar. Now we want to show you more ways to move things on the screen. The Move Requester lets you move and rotate a brush over a number of animation frames. More importantly, you can move and rotate the brush in all 3 dimensions. You are painting using perspective, and DPaint makes all the calculations for the individual frames. Let's clear the previous animation sequence. Next, choose Frames Set Number from the Anim menu. Change the frame count to 20 and click OK. Shift 1 will move us to frame 1 of the animation. Now, from the art disk, we'll load the brush called DPaint Tile. Let's try one of the most basic moves. First, we'll stamp the brush in the center of the screen. Then choose Move from the Anim menu, or the keyboard equivalent, Shift M. The first row in the Move Requester lists the axes in the 3-dimensional space of your screen. If you're familiar with perspective, you know that the x-axis is left and right, the y-axis is up and down, and the z-axis is in and out of the screen. Directly below the x, y, and z labels, there are edit fields for entering distance numbers. This is where you describe how far the brush should move in any direction or combination of directions. In addition to moving the brush along axes, the Move Requester lets you rotate the brush around 1 or more axes. The buttons labeled Brush, to the right of the distance and angle edit fields, let you set whether you want to move and rotate on the screen axes or the brush axes. The Clear button resets all of the X, Y, and Z movement and rotation information to 0. The Go Back button affects the location of the brush. If you want to do a second move from the original brush position, click Go Back. The Cyclic button toggles whether you want to chain your current move to another move, or the move is linear and will end on the last frame. Ease In and Ease Out lets you specify a number of frames over which the brush is to accelerate or decelerate during the move. Count Edit is used to specify the total number of frames that the current move will utilize. There are 2 icons under the move label. The one to the left, Go From, will begin the move on the current frame. The icon on the right, Come To, is most useful when it's easier to specify the position where you want the move to end. The Record options specify the direction in which the frames of your move are painted. The default setting paints the frames by flipping forward. In Place paints all of the move on the current frame. Reverse paints the frames by flipping backwards. The Preview button lets you see a wireframe of your intended move. Trails paints your animation frames leaving a trail of brush stamps. Fill uses the various position and rotations to define an endless surface of tiles made from your brush. Clicking on Draw executes the move. Cancel forgets your settings, while Exit leaves the move requester but remembers the various settings. Now, with a better understanding of the move requester, let's try a couple of examples. Remember we loaded and placed the DPaint 3 brush earlier. We're going to move it 200 units in the X direction. Now we can preview that movement. We see our brush enclosed in a wireframe move to the right across the screen. That looked okay. Now we'll change the distance to -200. This time we see the brush move to the left across the screen. Y distance moves the brush upward if the number is positive and downward if negative. Z distance moves the brush into the distance if positive or outwards to the screen if negative. You can use any combination of the 3 distance edit fields to move your brush anywhere in 3-dimensional space. Let's try some simple rotation. First, clear the distance and angle edit fields. Next, we'll enter 360 degrees of rotation in the Z angle edit field. This tells DPaint that we want to rotate the brush 360 degrees on the Z axis. Now preview. We see a wireframe representation of our brush rotate clockwise on the screen. Now by changing the Z angle setting to -360 degrees, we see the wireframe rotate counterclockwise. In our example, we've been moving a brush along the screen axes. As I mentioned earlier, we can move and rotate on either the screen axes or the brush axes. When your brush is in the standard orientation, movement on the brush axes is the same as the movement on the screen axes. If the brush is rotated using perspective, the brush axes may no longer correspond to the screen axes, and movement on the brush axes will be different. Choose Perspective Do from the Effects menu. The Enter key also puts us in perspective mode. We'll move the brush down near the bottom of the screen and press Shift-7 from the keypad to flop the brush over on its back. Stamp the brush down. If we use the Move requester to move the brush along the Y-axis, we can see the difference between screen-oriented and brush-oriented movement. Let's try moving a Y distance of 200 and click Preview. We see the wireframe move upwards on the screen. If we select brush orientation, the brush will move into the distance along the brush's Y-axis. You may have already guessed what will happen when we rotate the brush on its own axis rather than on the screen axis. This is sometimes difficult to visualize, so we'll give an example. Let's cancel out of the Move requester and reset the perspective settings. At this point, we once again have our brush in the original orientation and are in the perspective mode. Now rotate the brush 45 degrees on the Z axis so that the X and Y axes of the brush no longer match the X and Y axes on the screen. Stamp this rotated brush down in the middle of the screen. Once again, use the Move requester, but rather than using the menu, press Shift-M, Move's keyboard equivalent. Set the X angle to 360 degrees and turn the brush button off. Click Preview. With this setting, we see the brush tumble towards the screen on the X-axis. Remember, the brush is rotating on the screen's X-axis. Now we'll turn the brush button on and preview. This time the brush spins around its own X-axis. This idea is the same for all rotations, though it isn't always easy to predict what a complex set of rotations will look like. You'll probably find that most of your moves can be accomplished with rotations around only one axis at a time. If you have found this last example to be confusing, you should review the chapter on perspective in your DPaint 3 manual. There you will find more information on the differences between screen and brush angles. This might help you understand how the Move requester uses them. We've now worked our way down to the Go Back button. We'll show you the results of 2 different move paths, one without using Go Back and another with Go Back. After we clear all the frames and reset the perspective to its original orientation, we position the brush at the bottom of the screen and stamp it down. Next, display the Move requester and clear the edit fields. Set the Y distance to 200 and the Z distance to 400. Then draw. We're now creating the first part of the brush movement. The second part will continue from where the brush ended. In the Move Requester, we'll set the X distance to 800, leave the Y distance at 200, and set the Z distance to 0. Then draw. Let's play this little animation back. 4 is the keyboard equivalent for play animation. In this animation, the brush moves into the distance and upward, and then shoots off the screen diagonally. Because we did not use go back, the second part of the movement follows the end of the first part. Let's stop and try it again using the same settings, but we'll click go back before drawing the second part of the animation. We need to clear the frames and reset the perspective again. Let's try to stamp the brush down just about where it was before. We'll move the brush for its first segment using the same settings as before. When we go back to the Move Requester, we click Go Back to reposition the brush to the same place that we had stamped it down. Once again, we'll set the X to 800, leave the Y at 200, and set Z to 0. Now let's draw. This time we see that the animation shows the title splitting into two, with one title moving into the distance and upward, and the other moving diagonally to the right and off the screen. The Ease Out and Ease In edit fields let you specify a number of frames over which you want the brush to accelerate or decelerate. This lets you make the brush movement smooth at the beginning and ending points. Also, some effects require gradual acceleration and deceleration to be realistic. A bouncing ball is a good example of how this feature works. In the process, we'll also use the Come To option. Let's clear all of the frames. Now draw a small filled circle and pick it up as a brush. On frame 20, stamp the ball down near the bottom of the screen. In the Move Requester, click Clear and enter -170 for the Y distance, telling DPaint we want the brush to move downward. Set Ease Out to 20 and make sure that the count is also 20 to specify a gradual speed increase over 20 frames. Next, we'll select the Come To option so that the movement ends on the frame that we stamped our brush on. Let's see how it looks. We play it back in ping pong mode from the Anim menu, or press the key equivalent 6. Not bad. What remains in the Move Requester are the trails and fill functions. They are best explained in the Putting It All Together section of this video. This might be a good place for you to pause the tape and experiment with some of these techniques yourself.
So far, we've shown you how to create animation by painting on a series of frames. DPaint also lets you create a brush that animates.
The brush changes while you paint, and depending on whether or not the frame changes, you create either animation or interesting effects. To begin, let's create a simple animation that we can easily pick up as a brush. We'll want to use the default palette and have 20 blank frames for our animation. Now let's make a small gradient-filled circle and pick it up as a brush. Then we'll stamp it down and bring up the Move Requester. 360 degrees of Z rotation will give us an animation that looks a bit like a spinning planet. Now we'll step to frame 1 and choose Anim Brush Pickup from the Anim menu. This gives us a large crosshair just like the one we use to pick up standard brushes, but in this case it picks up from all of the frames. We see each of the frames flip as the area is picked up. Now we have an Anim brush. Another way to pick up an Anim brush is to hold down the left Amiga or Commodore key when you use the normal brush pickup tool. Now let's clear those frames. This time we'll step through the frames as we paint using the left Amiga or Commodore key. This is Anim painting with an Anim brush. If we play this back, it looks sort of like balls rolling across the screen. When you combine Anim brushes into large animations, you'll find that occasionally you may want to change the rate or direction which the Anim brush plays. For example, let's have our little planet spin in the opposite direction. This can be accomplished using the Anim Brush Settings option from the Anim menu. Just click the reverse button. Now our little planet spins in the opposite direction as we paint. While we're at it, let's try the yo-yo direction. Notice how the brush now spins back and forth? The duration field in the Anim Brush Settings requester lets you specify how many stamps of the Anim brush are used to complete its cycle. If the duration number is larger than the number of cells, the brush seems to move more slowly. If the duration number is smaller than the number of cells, the brush seems to move faster. Let's try painting normally with an Anim brush and then paint with a duration set higher. This time we'll use an Anim brush from the DPaint animation disk. We do this through the Anim brush load item in the Anim menu. Here's one, bird. This should work just fine. We need to set the direction so that the bird is flying properly. Now set the background color to light blue and clear all of the frames. We'll stamp the bird in the middle of the screen and use the move requester. Clear the old settings. We'll have the bird flying -100 in the X distance and -100 Y distance and draw. Our bird is flying outward from the middle of the screen towards the left edge. Now let's paint another bird that flaps more slowly. We'll go back into the Anim brush settings and set the duration to 24 and the current frame to 1. Okay, let's get back to frame 1 and bring up the move requester again. We'll use go back to get our bird to the starting point. Then, so this bird has a different path, we'll set his X direction to +100 and leave everything else the same. As expected, our bird is being drawn to the right. As we play the animation, compare the flapping of the bird's wings. If we step through the frames of the animation one at a time, we can see that the bird on the right takes 2 frames before changing the wing position, while the bird on the left moves its wings on every frame. Now we've covered all the basics of DPaint 3's animation capabilities. You might want to load the animations on your DPaint 3 animation disk and play them, or create some of your own.
Really the hardest part of DPaint 3 was just the whole task of getting the ability to edit a compressed anim, where every time you edit the compressed anim and step to the next page, the program has to go in and recompute the compression of that page relative to the previous page and the following page, and have that work fast enough that you can actually get the feeling of painting in an animation. I also think that anim brushes, because of the fact that you not only can animate with them, you can also paint in a picture with them, are going to find a lot of uses that you wouldn't anticipate. I think it's probably the thing I'm most proud of in the program, because it was hard to do, yet it really enables people to make use of machines that don't have much memory and still do animations.
In this segment, we will be covering the various functions, tools, and enhancements which can be quite useful but have not appeared elsewhere in this video.
Let's take a look at these now. Load and Save Picture will automatically list the devices which are available in your system. A Number of Frames Edit field is displayed if loading while multiple frames are established. Entering a number in this field will load the selected picture into that many consecutive frames. If you have multiple frames when saving, you may enter a range of frames to save. When you click Save, the frames are saved as separate pictures with the frame number added to the end of the name. For example, if we enter 5 to 10 as the range, the frames are saved as sample 5 through sample 10. You can flip your entire picture horizontally or vertically without having to pick it up as a brush. From the Picture menu, Flip Horizontal lets you flip a picture about its X-axis. Flip Vertical lets you flip a picture about its Y-axis. If there are multiple frames, you can flip one frame, a range of frames, or all the animation frames. In the Color Palette requester, 2 more ranges have been added, bringing the total to 6. If Merge to Front or Merge to Back is selected when there are multiple frames established, you can affect the current frame, a range of frames, or all of the frames. The About box now contains more information. In addition to program version number and credits, information regarding the amount of available memory and the size of your animation or anim brush is displayed. The Edge function modifies a 1-pixel boundary around the current brush. Edge Outline adds a 1-pixel boundary using the current foreground color. This is ideal for outlining text. Edge Trim deletes a 1-pixel boundary around the current brush. Handle lets you specify where the cursor holds a brush. Center positions the arrow at the center of the brush. Corner positions the cursor at one of the 4 corners. And Place lets you position the brush at an arbitrary XY offset from the brush. The F8 key is now the keyboard equivalent for smooth. the cursor on-off function has been moved to the delete key. The anim load requester works the same as load picture. When you load an animation, it replaces any other animation which may be in memory. When you append to an animation, the loaded frames will be added to the end of the current animation. Control Set Rate displays a requester allowing you to set the number of frames per second rate of your animation. You can also adjust the playback speed using the left and right arrow keys while an animation is playing. Control Set Range lets you specify a particular range of frames to play. The Make Stencil requester can be activated using the tilde key. If you have several animation frames and you make a stencil, DPaint automatically remakes the stencil as you step through the frames. If stencil is on when you pick up a custom brush, the stenciled colors appear transparent to your brush. This brings us to Prefs. The OR key will toggle whether the coordinates are displayed in the menu bar or not. Auto Transparency modifies the brush pickup so that it automatically determines the transparent color by looking at the corners of the captured area to see if they are the same color. If all of the corners are the same color, that color becomes transparent. Otherwise, the current background color remains transparent. When No Icons is on, files are saved to your disk without the icon info file. When Auto Grid is on, the perspective grid is automatically resized to match your current custom brush when you load or pick up a brush. This is the same as if you select From Brush from the perspective requester. We have now covered most of the new functions and updated tools that are found in DPaint 3. While there may be some other minor features, they should be self-explanatory or are well documented in your DPaint 3 manual.
I'd like to be able to map bitmaps onto 3D objects like cubes, rotate the cubes in space. I'd like to have extruded characters generated from bitmaps. I'd like to have sound. I'd like to be able to sync video recorders and other output devices. There's just no limit to how far you can go with this. It just depends on if this turns out to be a really good way to do animation, which I hope it does. I'd just like to say to people to go out there and use Deluxe Paint 3 and do all sorts of things that no one could have possibly anticipated, and send the pictures and the animations into Electronic Arts so we can see what you're doing with it. Enjoy it.
Now that we've covered most of DPaint 3's enhancements, we'll demonstrate how to combine these tools and techniques.
This example will demonstrate the trail function in the Move requester. First, load the brush called DPaint Title, then set the number of frames to 40. Advance halfway through the animation to frame 20. Next, stamp the brush down near the bottom of the screen. Using Shift-M, bring up the Move requester. Set the Z distance to -1000, turn the brush button on, select Come To, and set the count to 20, and click Trails. DPaint starts stamping the brush in the distance and continues to move towards us, leaving a trail. That was the first half of the animation. Now Shift-2 will advance us to the last frame in the animation. The tilde key brings up the Make Stencil requester. Select the background color and invert. This protects all of the colors except the background color. Once again, bring up the Move requester. Leave all the settings the same except the record direction. Set it to record in reverse. Again, click Trails. This time, DPaint stamps the brush in the foreground and steps into the distance, leaving a trail. Notice how the stencil protects the trail from the brush stamps. This completes the animation, so play it back in a continuous loop. This looks similar to the title effects you might see on TV. Here's a list of the primary features that were used to create the trailing title. This next example will demonstrate Move's fill function. First, prepare a custom brush. Next, set the frame count to 18 and stamp the brush down in the middle of the screen. Bring up the Move requester and set both the X and Z angles to 360 degrees. Make sure the count is 18. Preview shows the tumble effect that is going to be created. Next, click Fill to start DPaint working on the move. Due to all the calculations, this takes about 5 minutes. Now play back the animation. You'll begin to wonder which way is up. Here's the basic functions used in this 3D fill effect. Now for the most elaborate example yet, a spinning bouncing ball. Bring up the palette requester and set the last color to red. Copy the red to the spot just 4 positions away. By doing a spread between these, 5 identical reds are created. Set the next color to white. Copy this white just 4 positions away, just as we did with the red. Now make a range which starts at the first white and goes to the last red. Make sure that all the other ranges are turned off. Next, go back to range 1 and set the speed to full. By clicking the right mouse button on the filled box tool, the fill requester is displayed. Set the dither to none and select the horizontal gradient. With grid turned on, make a rectangle that's 2 grid spaces high and 4 wide. Turn on Exclude Brush, then pick up the rectangle as a brush. Clear the screen, and using the custom brush, make a large checkerboard pattern. Next, pick up a piece of the pattern that is 6 squares high and 6 squares wide. Then clear the screen. By turning color cycle on, it appears as though the red and white squares are moving, but this is just an illusion caused by the shifting colors. From the fill requester, choose Wrap. Turn on B square so that the circle is proportionally shaped. When we make a circle, we see the pattern is being wrapped around the ball. Now color cycle again. The ball appears to spin, but as I said earlier, this is just an illusion. Pick up the ball as a brush and clear the screen. Use perspective to tilt the ball. Once again, pick up the ball and clear the screen. Now for the animation. Set the frame count to 20. And stamp the ball near the bottom of the screen. Then bring up the Move requester. Set the Y distance to 100 And to create a gravity effect, set ease in to 20. Preview will show the move. Click Draw to create the 20 frames of the move. To see the ball bounce, select from the Anim Control menu, Ping Pong, or press 6. Use Shift 1 to get to frame 1. Once again, pick up the ball. This time, hold down the left Amiga or Commodore key so that DPaint grabs it as an anim brush. Remember to pick up the entire area that the ball bounces within. Now that we have an anim brush, clear all of the frames. Hold the anim brush by the lower corner. Next, in the anim brush settings, select Ping Pong. This changes the anim brush length to 38 for a complete loop. Next, we'll set the frame count to match. We'll go back to frame 1, and since the number of frames is 38, set the current brush frame to 19, which is in the middle. A right mouse button click on the line tool brings up the spacings requester. Set end total to 38, giving 38 steps in a line. F10 will turn the menu bar off. Now position the ball on the left with the pointer at the bottom of the screen. While holding down the left Amiga or Commodore key and the left mouse button, drag a line across the bottom edge of the screen. When you release the mouse button, DPaint steps through, stamping one anim brush frame on each animation page. Now turn color cycling on and press 6 to see the animation play back in a ping-pong fashion. Although these demonstrations may not match your applications exactly, they may provide you with helpful concepts. Try combining some of these techniques to fulfill your specific graphic needs.
Deluxe Paint 3 is the kind of program that invites experimentation, so feel free to play around with its various tools and effects. You may even discover an artistic side you never knew you had.